The bride wasn't there to marry him. She was there to bury him. Vivian Moretti walked toward Lorenzo Duca in ivory silk, smiling like the perfect Mafia bride. But hidden behind that veil was a 5-year plan built by Salvatore Vieri, a man who didn't send soldiers. He sent women. Beautiful, patient women who married powerful men, inherited their empires, and handed everything to him after the funeral. Lorenzo thought he was choosing a wife. He was actually inviting death into his bed. Today, you and I are going to unpack a story about power, fear, and the lies we tell ourselves. Picture a sprawling Long Island estate, bathed in a crisp autumn light that masked the rot underneath. The heavy scent of 2,000 imported white roses, mixed with 300 hand-poured candles, a setting built to make everyone else feel small. At the center of this reality stood 37-year-old Lorenzo Duca, the youngest apex predator in syndicate history. Standing at the altar in a custom black tuxedo, he looked less like a groom and more like a tragic king preparing for a brutal coronation. It teaches us a simple, undeniable lesson. The harder a man works to perfectly control his physical surroundings, the more terrified he is of his own internal chaos. Lorenzo wore his physical presentation like an immaculate suit of armor. Picture the close-up. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw sharp, and his cold, slate-gray eyes seemed entirely empty of normal human empathy. He kept his expression perfectly flat, a practiced trick used to hide a deeply dangerous mind. Hidden in his right palm, he rolled a platinum band, holding a 5-carat diamond. This ring was no symbol of love. It was a heavy artifact of generational pain, passed down from women who had learned to survive the violent men who owned them. Across the lawn, 300 powerful guests sat in rigid rows. They looked untouchable, but here is a basic truth we all eventually face. Inherited trauma never skips a generation, unless someone brave actively forces it to stop. Look closely, and you can see the bizarre contradictions among the guests. A ruthless syndicate captain from Palermo chatted quietly with a federal judge, while lawmakers and the widows of violent men casually sipped expensive champagne. Everyone wore a mask of polite joy, but beneath the surface, their nervous systems were screaming. Nobody was actually relaxing. The entire perimeter was locked down by 32 armed guards dressed in formal wear. They moved with the stiff, hyper-vigilant precision of men who knew a single mistake would be fatal. Beneath their tailored jackets lay the cold, heavy reality of concealed firearms. It shows us a simple grounding fact about human nature. No amount of hoarded wealth or social status can ever buy a mind that is truly at peace. Those guards provided a fragile illusion of safety to keep the crowd compliant. Beside the groom stood Vincent Russo, an older advisor whose entire adult life was built on high-stakes survival. His hands looked steady, but chronic stress was quietly tearing him apart. A deep tightness gripped his chest, a clear physical warning of an incoming threat, but he stubbornly refused to acknowledge it. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A string quartet began playing a slow, traditional Sicilian melody, and a heavy wave of anticipation swept through the seated crowd. Vivian Moretti finally appeared at the top of the aisle, elegantly draped in ivory silk. It is a harsh but useful lesson for us all. Ignoring what your body tries to tell, you never stops the threat from actually arriving. Vivian had carefully constructed a perfect external image. Pearls were woven through her dark hair, and her veil hung motionless in the dead air. She walked down the aisle entirely alone, a calculated move to project independence in a brutal world that allowed none. Her measured steps and practiced smiles felt entirely manufactured. She was simply too flawless to be genuine. Lorenzo watched her approach, his thumb rhythmically stroking the hidden ring to soothe his nerves. But just outside this controlled space, a frantic sound shattered the silence. It was the rapid, desperate strike of little shoes hitting the stone path. The lesson here is quite clear. The most perfectly polished facades are almost always hiding the deepest, most devastating psychological fractures. At first, the guests assumed the noise was just a wandering child. Polite smiles formed across the audience as an automatic social reflex. But those fake smiles vanished the second the tiny figure came into full view. This was no flower girl. She was maybe 7 years old, wearing a simple blue dress that looked completely out of place among the silken tuxedos. Her clothes were covered in dirt, and her little shoes were badly scuffed. Her messy hair and panicked breathing painted a clear picture of intense distress. Yet, her dark eyes remained remarkably focused, staring straight ahead at the altar. It proves a profound psychological truth. A child forced to carry the weight of severe trauma will often display more steady resolve than a room full of seasoned killers. Picture the golden afternoon. Light catching the absolute clarity in this child's eyes. Her fragile voice sliced right through the heavy garden air, completely shattering the illusion of a polite mobster wedding. "Don't marry her," the young girl shouted. "Please, Mr. Duca, don't marry her." The reaction was an ugly, violent spasm of paranoia. 32 guards moved as a single terrified organism. Tailored suit jackets swept open. The sharp, mechanical clack of 32 metal slides racking back echoed across the silent flowers. It proves a simple rule of our nature. When people live their entire lives anticipating a knife in the back, they will quickly draw a gun on a child's shadow if it moves even an inch. Cold panic rippled through the garden. Wealthy bosses dropped behind their expensive chairs, instantly reverting to brutal street survival tactics. The sharp crack of a dropped champagne glass marked the shift from a romantic celebration to a deadly crisis. Yet, little Sophia showed absolutely zero fear. She did not flinch. She made no attempt to run. She just stood in the bright sunlight, surrounded by lethal weapons, her dark eyes locked onto the groom. Lorenzo merely mirrored her eerie stillness. His mind bypassed the panic entirely, calmly analyzing the bizarre threat before him. We can all learn from this quiet tension. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do when surrounded by absolute chaos is to just hold your ground and refuse to move. Lorenzo used a single gesture to kill the suffocating tension, slowly raising one open hand. "Stand down," he commanded. He did not even raise his voice, always the clearest indicator of absolute authority. The guards instantly lowered their guns, melting back into the shadows. Beside the altar, Vivian was experiencing a complete internal meltdown. The blood drained from her pale face, exposing the raw panic underneath. Desperate to maintain her elegant control, she forced a terrible, trembling smile. "Lorenzo," she stammered, "who is this child? What is she doing here?" It points to a fascinating reality of human behavior. True power never needs to shout, and deep-rooted fear cannot be hidden, no matter how hard you force a smile. You and I should pause and watch how this unfolds, frame by frame. Sophia didn't even look at the crime boss anymore. She shifted her hollow eyes to Vivian, raising one small arm with the chilling precision of a sniper. She pointed directly at the beautiful bride, marking her as the architect of her nightmare. "She destroyed my family," the young girl stated steadily. "She killed my daddy." The reaction across the lawn was a violent freeze. The quiet morphed into the paralyzing stillness of pure shock. Even the wind seemed to die out, mirroring the held breath of 300 dangerous guests. The lesson here is undeniable. A guilty conscience is so incredibly heavy that one single, spoken truth can instantly suck the oxygen out of a massive empire of lies. Surprisingly, the cold groom was the one to break the spell. Lorenzo completely ignored his panicked bride and the sweating priest clutching his Bible like a physical shield. Lorenzo kept his intense focus locked only on the young girl. He abandoned his position of dominance at the altar and slowly walked back down the white aisle, breaking every rigid rule until he reached the child. Then, in full view of the most ruthless bosses in the city, this terrifying apex predator dropped down onto one knee. It was a stunning display of deliberate empathy. Life teaches us this hard truth constantly. Strongest people are not the ones who proudly stand above the broken, but the ones willing to kneel down beside them in the dirt. Vivian's elegant facade shattered, exposing the frantic tone of someone rapidly losing her grip. Lorenzo, "This is absurd," she hissed, her voice cracking under the intense sunlight. "Get up. You cannot possibly be listening to this nonsense." Lorenzo didn't even turn his head. Quiet. That single heavy word completely shut down her manipulation. Kneeling close to the girl, Lorenzo could finally see the terrible physical toll. Her small shoulders were violently trembling. Her pale hands gripped a cheap cloth purse like a lifeline. Yet, her haunted eyes absolutely refused to look away. Here is a simple truth about connection. When you strip away the noise, genuine eye contact between two damaged people speaks louder than any weapon ever could. Let us step behind the camera, you and I, to watch Lorenzo master this tragic beat. The afternoon light catches the sharp lines of his face as he shifts from a hardened groom into something devastatingly gentle. "What is your name?" he asks, the air perfectly still. "Sophia," she breathes back. She looks like a porcelain doll about to shatter on the stones. Her trembling fingers claw at the brass catch of her worn purse, fighting through waves of adrenaline. Finally, it clicks open. With the agonizing reverence of a priest handling a holy relic, she withdraws a single folded photograph. The camera lingers here, revealing a simple truth for us. All you can bury your sins deep beneath layers of silk and wealth. But the dark earth always surrenders its ghosts. The lens pulls focus onto the damning evidence in her tiny hands. The Polaroid is yellowed at the edges, cracking from the desperate grip of a child, holding onto her only anchor in the dark. Sophia unfolds it, her shoulders hunched in the heartbreaking posture of a survivor expecting a blow. Lorenzo takes it with devastating caution. It is an overexposed image, washed out by the glaring sun of a cheap parking lot. Yet, the tragedy is unmistakable. Beside the car stands a younger woman, but the rigid set of her jaw and the cruel, bloodless line of her mouth cannot be hidden. It is Vivian. The cruelty of life reminds us that while trauma carves deep into an innocent soul, the wicked will always leave a careless footprint in the dirt. Look closely at the man beside the monster. He flashes the naive, tragic smile of someone who believes he has just been pulled from the wreckage, completely blind to the knife at his back. "That is my daddy," Sophia whispers. The sheer grief in those words cracks the heavy garden air right down the middle. His name was Marcus Bennett. Up at the altar, veiled in expensive lace, Vivian suffers a microscopic stutter in her breath. It is a tiny, fatal spasm. Vincent Russo, standing in the shadows like a loaded gun, catches the slip instantly. Lorenzo slowly lifts his chin. The warm light leaves his eyes entirely, replacing the devoted groom with an apex predator measuring his prey. You can spin a masterpiece of lies, but a guilty conscience will always force the flesh to betray you. "You knew that name," Lorenzo says. The tone is dead, devoid of all the romantic warmth that filled the courtyard moments ago. Vivian's radiant bridal facade fractures into sharp, ugly splinters. "Lorenzo, I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," she insists. It is the frantic backpedaling of a trapped animal. Lorenzo looks down at the glossy paper, burning the image of Marcus Bennett's foolish hope into his mind. "I have written scenes of ruthless men breaking under pressure." But Lorenzo's silent devastation is agonizing to witness. The color drains from his knuckles as his grip crushes the edge of the Polaroid. Vivian watches the muscles in his forearms tighten. Sensing the collapse of her empire, she bares her teeth and launches her counterattack. "Are you really going to ruin our wedding over a random child?" Vivian demands. She projects her own rotting guilt directly onto the innocent girl. "Just look at her. She is a stranger." She pitches her voice with theatrical perfection, playing the victimized bride to the back rows. The older syndicate bosses stir under the canvas tents, the rustle of their expensive suits betraying sudden unease. Vivian plays the crowd like a maestro, wrapping her poison in white silk. The cruelest lies are always dressed as wounded innocents, but the stage completely shifts when Donna Isabella Duca rises from the front pew. Draped in heavy black silk, she does not rush. At 68, she moves with the deliberate grace of a queen, stepping onto the battlefield to protect her bloodline. The ambient sound drops out of the scene completely. The wind stops rustling the lemon trees. Donna Isabella simply elevates one slender, manicured hand, her palm facing the restless crowd, and the rising murmur is instantly suffocated. It is a breathtaking display of raw, gravitational dominance. This is a woman who has buried the men she loved and commanded the men she feared, forging an empire in pure iron. With a single gesture, the most dangerous figures in the country sit quietly back down, folding their hands. Lorenzo never even turns his head to check the perimeter. He feels the impenetrable weight of his mother's protection lock into place behind his back. "Sophia," he asks, his voice staying impossibly soft as he remains kneeling on the unforgiving stone. "Tell me what happened to your father," he murmurs. He pushes just hard enough to break through the child's paralyzing terror. Sophia's dark eyes well with tears, but her cruel history refuses to let them fall. "She took Daddy's money," the girl whispers. "All of it. Then he got hurt. Then he died." The fragmented cadence of her tiny voice is a devastating blow, echoing through the breathless courtyard. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the estate bang open against the plaster walls. The frantic slap of cheap rubber soles disrupts the awful silence. Elena Bennett comes tearing down the stone aisle, a kitchen apron still tied around her waist. "Listen to me. True fear ages a person instantly." She is 32, but the blinding panic on her face carves decades into her expression. Elena stumbles over the pristine grass, drowning in a sudden flood of adrenaline. She looks at Lorenzo and sees only the grim executioner of her worst nightmares. "I am so sorry, Mr. Duca," she pleads, her hands shaking violently. She slipped away. "Please forgive her." "Stop," Lorenzo commands. The word is not shouted. It drops from his lips with a cold, terrifying gravity that freezes the marrow in your bones. "Both of you stay right here." Elena's knees buckle as her body submits to the authority. Behind him, Vivian spins wildly, her trailing veil kicking up dust like a ruined theater curtain. "This is a setup," she cries out to the silent audience. "Someone planted this brat." Precisely on cue, Vincent Russo steps out of the shadows, the physical embodiment of a closing grave. "The guests are watching," Vincent whispers. His flat eyes scan the rising tension among the seated soldiers. Lorenzo rises to his feet. The motion is slow, calculated, and totally unbothered by the suffocating social pressure beating down on him. He looks past the terrified priest and locks his stare onto the woman he almost married. "The wedding," he announces, his voice slicing through the heavy floral scent of the garden, "is cancelled." The silence shatters into pure chaos. 300 guests inhale sharply, the tension snapping like a frayed wire. "Stick with me here, because this is where the facade violently burns to the ground." "You cannot do this to me," Vivian shrieks. The elegant bride is gone, leaving only the raw edges of her broken vanity for the world to witness. A mass panic inside a heavily guarded compound only survives until the architects of the violence decide to end it. Before Vivian's desperate scream can even fade, Donna Isabella executes her final strike. She raises her hand a second time. The garden instantly transforms. 200 men in dark suits, close ranks, surging forward like a rising tide to partition the lawn. Hidden earpieces buzz with cold, clipped commands. Escape routes dissolve into walls of muscle. High-ranking senators are gently but firmly redirected, while hardened enforcers yield to the silent stares of the Duca loyalists. Even the string quartet lowers their instruments in eerie synchronization. When Donna Isabella speaks, her voice is a masterstroke of velvet over steel, making defiance absolutely impossible. "My friends," the matriarch begins. She pivots gracefully, her icy gaze sweeping over the crowd and suffocating any remaining resistance. "Forgive us, but a private matter requires our attention. Please enjoy the dining hall. As a writer, I study moments like this." It is a breathtaking feat of psychological dominance. She offers no real explanation, ignores the bleeding emotional wound in the center of the aisle, and effectively hypnotizes 300 lethal men into marching inside like quiet sheep. The terrifying truth of the world is that real power is never found in a loud voice or a drawn weapon. Real power is a conditioned reflex, carved deep into the bones of your enemies through decades of absolute, merciless discipline. The crowd simply turns around and walks away. Two of Vincent's finest operators glide to Vivienne's sides. They do not even lay a finger on her white dress. The sheer crushing is enough to break her posture. Miss Moretti, one of them murmurs smoothly. In 2 words, he completely strips away the duca name she sacrificed her soul to steal. Please come with us to the East Room. I am the bride, she hisses back, her mind violently rejecting the reality of her sudden exile. Yes, miss, the shadow replies, feeding her delusion just enough to keep her moving forward. She marches away, her chin tilted high in a pathetic illusion of triumph, dragging her soiled veil through the dirt. Lorenzo never looks back at her. His world has just burned down, but he is already sheltering the broken child from the ash. The heavy walnut door of the study clicks shut, sealing away the nightmares of the estate. Elena lingers by the threshold, her fingers trembling in sudden, violent spasms, the tragic, lingering echo of a woman who has spent a lifetime apologizing to phantoms. Lorenzo, framed by the dim glow of the desk lamp, drops slowly to one knee against the Persian rug. He shrinks his imposing frame, stripping away the shadow of his power. You are safe here, he whispers, forging a fragile new universe for them. As the child's mind finally accepts this impossible truth, the dam shatters. Her small, exhausted face crumbles, and years of suffocated agony rip through her chest in breathless, violent sobs. You and I know this kind of pain, don't we? It teaches us that true healing only begins the moment we are finally allowed to fall apart. Let us linger on this frame for a moment, letting the sheer weight of it sink into our bones. A little girl, frozen by the threat of her own murder, stares up at a mob boss. Lorenzo reaches out, his rough fingers gently brushing a tear from her cheek, softly promising her that she did the right thing. In the corner, Elena weeps without making a single sound. That absolute silence is devastating, the primal reflex of a hunted animal terrified to breathe. He presses a glass of water into her trembling hands and asks about the man she lost. The darkest of tales spills out. A simple man from Boston, a ghost in an emerald dress and a ruined home. It is a haunting lesson that the most lethal monsters never hide in the shadows. They simply smile at us in the broad daylight. We are watching the clinical, bloodless anatomy of an underworld execution. A father's life savings dissolve, followed by the phantom woman who stole it. The air in their home grows thick with the dread of midnight phone calls and men demanding their stolen gold. The final act is brutally unoriginal, a solitary car swallowed by a New Jersey highway, leaving behind no skid marks, only a charred wedding band. Lorenzo absorbs every agonizing word in perfect stillness. When she finally finishes, he pulls open the heavy door to find Vincent, his weathered enforcer, waiting in the dim hall. Lorenzo orders him to dissect Vivienne Moratti's existence with surgical rage. It is a stark truth we must all eventually face. No matter how deeply you bury your sins, the earth will always spit them back up. The amber glow of the desk lamp spills across the weathered photograph as Lorenzo slowly slides it under the light. He turns it over, his eyes tracing the faded graphite of a desperate, heartbreaking anchor. It simply reads, "For Sophia from Marcus, September 14th. But just beneath that tender devotion, a much darker story reveals itself. Deep impressions in the paper, pressed down by a cruel hand, clearly spell the name Salvatore. It is the ultimate hubris of a predator, unable to destroy a family without carving their own arrogant signature into the ruin. We often find that vanity is the exact poison that destroys the wicked, as they simply cannot resist admiring their reflection in the damage they cause. Lorenzo stares at the indentations, his jaw hardening, and turns away. The phantoms in that photograph will simply have to wait. Lorenzo looks at the shattered woman and...
So actually looks at the shattered woman, pocketing the picture before killing the warm cell study lights.
Follow me down the shadows of this narrow, hidden staircase he has not dared to walk since he was a frightened boy of 12. Faded oil portraits of forgotten servants line the peeling wallpaper. He has ruled this sprawling estate for decades, entirely blind to the invisible hands that keep his kingdom turning. Stepping onto the cold kitchen tiles, the blinders finally fall away from his eyes. Sometimes, it takes witnessing the profound grief of a stranger to make us realize how blind we are to our own quiet cages. True vision only comes when our hearts are broken open. The sprawling kitchen is silent, save for the dull gleam of heavy copper pots above a flour-dusted butcher block. This is Elena's sanctuary. Guided purely by the phantom pull of survival, she drifts toward the massive iron stove. Her bruised body surrenders to an ingrained routine, long before her mind can process the dread. A blue gas flame hisses to life. She steeps sweet chamomile for her fragile daughter and a bitter dark brew for Lorenzo. In 2 invisible years of scrubbing his floors, her terrified mind meticulously memorized the exact way this dangerous king takes his tea, even though his eyes never once met hers. It is a instinct. We relentlessly study the terrifying shadows in our lives, praying that if we understand them perfectly, they might just decide to spare us. Picture a ruthless emperor suddenly sitting at a scarred wooden servant's table. Lorenzo has never occupied this humble space, yet the raw truth of this room grounds him in his ways. His velvet dining hall never could. Beside his heavy frame, tiny Sophia folds herself into a rigid knot, clutching a battered gray bear to her chest like it is forged from iron. Lorenzo leans forward, his voice a steady rumble, and asks Elena to start from the beginning. Her voice trembles with the tragic devotion of a hostage, desperately trying to protect the tarnished memory of her husband. For 8 quiet years, Marcus was her steady, gentle rock. It is the most bitter pill of human existence. The most devastating storms always seem to brew in the clearest, most beautifully ordinary skies we take for granted. Marcus was the beautiful epitome of an ordinary life. He sold tactical gear in Boston, cheered on toddlers at Sunday soccer games, and carried the warm scent of plain soap and motor oil. But then, the tragedy demands its fatal twist. 4 years ago, he stepped himself in an unfamiliar, stiff tuxedo for a charity gala. When he walked through the door that night, speaking of a brilliant woman he had just met, the temperature in the room plummeted. Elena felt an icy stone drop into her stomach, reading the microscopic tremors of guilt in her husband's soft eyes. The predator had already planted its seed. It is a profound lesson we must never ignore. Your deepest intuition always senses the invisible venom in the water long before your conscious mind ever takes its first desperate drink. You and I have to examine the terrifying elegance of this trap. For 4 agonizingly slow months, the phantom named Vivian asked for nothing, spinning a flawless web of artificial intimacy. Then, with a casual whisper, she dangled the golden promise of a secret investment. The rusted hook sank violently through his jaw. It proves a chilling reality. The devil does not kick your front door off its hinges. He waits patiently for you to hand over the keys. Hypnotized, Marcus dragged a match across his entire world. He sold the shop, the old truck, the family hearth. He borrowed dripping blood money, wiring his soul to a bank account scribbled on a damp napkin. Then the phantom vanished. Silence fell, broken only by the deafening, violent pounding of debt collectors in the dead of night. Driven by the blinding terror of a hunted animal, Marcus dragged his wife and child into the shadows of a cheap rental, hiding behind Elena's maiden name. But a shadow cannot outrun the dark. 6 weeks later, bathed in the cruel blue lights of a police cruiser, a state trooper held up an evidence bag containing a blackened gold ring. They claimed his car launched off a desolate curve of Route 17. No desperate skid marks, just a ruptured tank to incinerate the sins left behind. Elena grips her teacup, her voice hollow, confessing that absolutely no one believed it was a tragic mistake. To shield her fragile daughter, she buried her past, scrubbing floors for another tyrant just to disappear. It is a devastating truth of the conquered. Sometimes, wrapping yourself in total silence is the only armor you have left to wear. Little Sophia remains trapped in her own mind, her pale knuckles squeezing the cotton life out of her bear. Lorenzo studies the trembling girl before aiming the heaviest question at Elena. How did a child instantly recognize a ghost after 4 long years? Elena clings to the rough wood, her buried terror bleeding through her skin. She confesses that Vivienne had slithered into their apartment one afternoon. It was Sophia who turned the doorknob. Suddenly, the child's fractured voice pierces the heavy air. The lady smiled. She whispers, but her face was completely hollow. Dead eyes. A child's untainted soul does not fall for the masks of polite society. It instantly senses the viper beneath the silk. Lorenzo listens to this chilling truth, slowly setting his porcelain cup against the saucer with a sharp, echoing clink. The invisible strings are finally pulled taut in Lorenzo's mind. The ghostly handwriting, the theatrical wedding, and the sickening revelation that this viper had seduced him with the exact same venom she drifted into his orbit 4 months ago, demanding absolutely nothing. To a man forged in violence, this is no longer serendipity. It is the calculated patience of an apex predator. While he sits in the dark, Vincent is already weaving through the Long Island dust in a black sedan. Let's watch this master at work together. He bypasses the digital world, knowing that blood-soaked secrets are only traded by old men whispering in smoke-filled rooms. He dials an encrypted phone before the gates even latch. It is a timeless lesson. A quietly owed favor will always carry a sharper blade than any modern weapon. Let the camera pan down to the wet asphalt of Astoria. Vincent sits in his idling sedan, swallowed by the pitch-black shadow of a closed bakery. Watch how still he is. He dials Palermo first. The voice on the other end answers in heavy Sicilian, no surprise. Just a flat promise to return the call. A universal signal for deep, undeniable danger. He dials Naples. Then Marseille, cashing in blood debts forged in 1981. Each call lasts exactly 90 seconds. No warmth. Just the freezing machinery of the underworld waking up. He rests his forehead against the steering wheel, waiting for the monsters to confirm the terrible truth. The lesson here is quiet, but heavy. The darkest truths do not arrive with a bang. They arrive in the agonizing silence of waiting in the dark. We cut to a basement tavern bathed in suffocating amber light. Vincent slides into a booth, across from a man who barely casts a shadow, a nameless informant dissolving into the cigarette smoke. The bartender pushes a glass of grappa across the wood. Vincent asks for Moretti. The informant does not blink. He just stares into his black coffee and softly dismantles a life. The woman Lorenzo almost married, she was born in 2018. Her Roman passport, her tax history, every single page, is a flawless forgery. Look closely at this tragedy. The devil never knocks on your door covered in brimstone and blood. He arrives with immaculate paperwork and a tender smile, proving that true danger always disguises itself as exactly what your lonely heart desperately wants to see. The camera holds on the informant's dead, watery eyes. He whispers that perfection is the ultimate symptom of a diseased reality. A life without a single flaw is not lived, it is manufactured in a dark room. Vincent leans into the dim light, demanding the architect of this phantom woman. The answer hangs in the stale air, Salvatore Vieri. Focus on Vincent S. hands right now. The glass of grappa remains perfectly still, but beneath the wool of his coat, his soul turns to absolute frost. He watched them put Vieri in the dirt, yet the puppet master breathes in Catania. This is the tragic poetry of violence. The ghosts you refuse to properly bury are the exact same ones that will inevitably rise to tear down your home. You can never truly outrun a surviving sin. Look at the terrifying elegance of this strategy. Vieri does not send foot soldiers with rifles. Bullets leave a trail. Instead, he weaponizes patience, sending a stunning woman to act as a slow-moving infection. She marries the king, memorizes the cracks in his armor, and quietly unbolts the fortress from the inside. By the time the husband realizes he is sharing his bed with an assassin, his lungs are already failing. He dies. The grieving widow inherits the throne, and Vieri claims the empire without firing a single shot. Russo, Marino, Greco, 3 titans erased. It is a brutal reminder that the most fatal mistakes we make are not forged in the heat of battle, but at a quiet moment would we finally decide it is safe enough to lay our weapons down. and close our eyes. 3 powerful empires quietly handed their keys to Catania, while 3 widows wept in public. The informant slides his empty cup away. Vincent realizes Lorenzo is target number 4. We cut to the estate at 10 o'clock, the atmosphere thick with suffocating irony. 300 empty wooden chairs sit abandoned on the manicured lawn beneath pale, ghostly tents. A grand celebration rotting before it even begins. Inside the mansion, the shadows stretch long. Lorenzo sits paralyzed behind his desk, illuminated only by a harsh green reading lamp, staring helplessly at a photograph. It is a cinematic portrait of ruin. All the wealth and armed guards on earth cannot build a wall thick enough to protect a man from the crushing weight of an absolute betrayal. The heavy oak door clicks shut. Vincent stands in the dim light and delivers the fatal blow in 7 clinical, hollow sentences. Lorenzo does not even look up to meet his brother's eyes. The muscles in his jaw twitch as he asks how many families she has dismantled. The romance is dead. She is nothing but a parasite to him now. Vincent names the 3 fallen kings. Lorenzo slowly rises, turning his back to the room to stare through the reinforced glass. Outside, the sky has bruised into the color of cold iron. The estate is buried in total silence. But within the walls of this study, a catastrophic war has just been declared. We must remember this heartbreaking truth. The cruelest monsters do not wait in the dark. To ambush us, they walk beside us in the sun, holding our hands. Let the camera drift upstairs to the 2nd floor, where Donna Isabella is desperately trying to contain the bleeding. She isolates the child, Sophia, and her mother, Elena, far from the dungeon where Vivienne is now held. The bedroom is painted a soft, mocking blue. Silver trays of untouched food sit, turning cold on the credenza. When Lorenzo softly opens the door for a midnight check, he finds Elena collapsed in an armchair. But look at the tension in her frame. Her knuckles are white, her fingers braided tight, her spine rigid. She is too terrified to surrender to actual sleep. Her nervous system is a burning wire. It is a harsh lesson in anatomy. The mind can try to bury its terror, but the bones and muscles will forever carry the heavy, agonizing debt of untreated trauma. Lorenzo steps past the trembling mother and moves to the empty, massive bed. The camera pans to the window seat, where little Sophia is pulled into a tight knot, strangling a frayed gray teddy bear. She sheds no tears. She makes no sound. She just stares out into the jagged silhouettes of the trees, with the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier waiting for the mortar shells to fall. Lorenzo executes a perfect, heartbreaking move. He refuses to crowd her space. He lowers his massive frame onto the very edge of the bench, offering only the gravity of his quiet protection. He asks her if sleep refuses to come, and she offers a slow, rigid shake of her tiny head. This is the tragedy of untreated terror. When fear is left to fester in silence, it freezes the soul entirely in place. You and I are watching a wounded king try to heal a broken child. Lorenzo looks at her and whispers that sometimes he cannot sleep either. The bridge is built. A cold draft rattles the glass, and Sophia finally shatters the silence. She asks to trade a secret about her dead father. Lorenzo leans in, offering his absolute presence. She whispers about hiding in the shadows, listening to her dad weep on a burner phone after her mother left the room. He was begging for forgiveness, drowning in guilt. Then came his final, devastating instruction. To his little girl, tell mommy that daddy was stupid. The sob that followed barely sounded human. We learn right here that the heaviest chains we drag through life are the agonizing lies we tell to protect the fragile people we love. The child recalls how the horrific call ended with a simple, desperate plea of love, right before the line went dead forever. The true horror of this scene is the absolute deadness in her tiny voice. Her mind is systematically severing her emotional vocal cords just to survive the playback of the memory. Lorenzo does not press her. He simply places his scarred, heavy hand on the velvet cushion between them, a silent anchor in a raging storm. After an eternity, her small trembling fingers reach out and latch on to his knuckles. Then he gently asks the vital question. When the bad woman came to their apartment, was there anyone else? Sophia whispers about a shadow in the hall. It teaches us that true bravery is not a lack of fear, but reaching your hand out in the absolute dark. Notice how children act as invisible cameras, recording every sin the adults believe is perfectly hidden. Sophia tells him the stranger never crossed the threshold, but she memorized his shape. When Lorenzo softly asks for a description, the little girl becomes a seasoned interrogator. She speaks of an old man with thinning gray hair, taller than her father. Then, in a moment that drops the temperature of the room, she drags her tiny finger down her own cheek, mapping out a massive, jagged scar from eye to jaw. Violence always signs its ugly canvas, does it not? Lorenzo's blood turns to ice water in his veins. She just painted a perfect portrait of a dead man. It proves the tragic reality that the sins you attempt to bury shallowly will always rise from the earth to drag you down. The scarred ghost from Catania is breathing again. Lorenzo pours his pounding heart into a terrifyingly slow rhythm, keeping his baritone voice smooth as silk. He asks if the man with the scar ever spoke to her father. The camera closes in on Sophia's wide eyes as she confesses to eavesdropping on another doomed afternoon. She perfectly parrots the monster's venom. "You will be rewarded for your loyalty, Mr. Bennett. You have done incredibly well." And her broken father had simply wept, whispering the word, "soon." This is the sickening architecture of betrayal. You swaddle the victim in a beautiful illusion of safety, right before you sever their throat. The brutal lesson here is timeless. The loudest voices promising you a golden crown are almost always preparing to dig your grave. Let us freeze the frame right here. You and I can see the exact second the fractured pieces of this tragedy lock together behind Lorenzo's eyes. Marcus Bennett was never just collateral damage, bleeding out on the asphalt. He was a disposable pawn, pulled into a sociopath's gravity, drained of his worth, and discarded on Route 17 at 3 a.m. with a bullet in his skull. The camera lingers on Lorenzo's jaw, clenched tight, as he wages a silent war to hide the creeping terror. With trembling hands, he drapes a thick quilt across the shoulders of the shattered little girl, trying to build a fortress in the cold shadows. The profound truth grabbed his world. The profound truth of this world is that real power is never measured by the violence you unleash, but by the fragile innocence you manage to protect when the lights finally go out. Notice the tight close-up on Lorenzo as he meets her terrified gaze. "Try to sleep now," he murmurs, his voice a gravelly anchor in the room. "Nobody is coming through that window tonight. I swear it." The promise settles over her like a heavy sedative. We watch the sheer weight of exhaustion drag her down into a deep sleep. He remains still in the dim light until the rise and fall of her chest evens out. Then he steps into the pitch-black corridor. Stripped of his audience, the dam finally shatters. He balls his fist, the crack of his knuckles ringing out like a gunshot in the hall. As dawn bleeds through the curtains, every illusion of safety vanishes. It is a bitter lesson we all face eventually. Peace is a delicate glass ornament, and sometimes you must wage a brutal war just to sweep up the broken pieces. Let us hold on this wide shot of the compound. You can practically smell the sour, metallic tang of paranoia bleeding from the stone walls. Outside, the guards pace the gravel, heavy artillery, dragging down their tailored coats as they sweat under the morning sun. By 9 a.m, the family seals themselves inside the windowless library on the second floor. The lighting here is desperately bleak. It is a suffocating tomb built for locked doors and rotting secrets. Above them, the grand oil portraits of Lorenzo's dead father and grandfather cast long, judgmental shadows over the mahogany table. It paints a tragic, universal truth for all of us. You can build walls of solid iron to keep out the wolves, but you will never lock out the demons. But you have already invited into your own home. I crossed the camera panned slowly from the 1958 portrait of the great-uncle, whose painted eyes seemed to burn holes through the living. Donna Isabella commands the head of the table, shedding her mourning clothes for a razor-sharp charcoal suit. She weaponizes 68 years of ruthless survival, her mere posture choking the oxygen from the room. At the far end, Lorenzo operates like a hollow machine. He suffocates his own grief, methodically dealing out the grainy surveillance photos and the grim intelligence Vincent dragged from the shadows. It is deeply tragic to watch him wear the mask of an untouchable king because he fears his own sorrow. Yet life always teaches us the same painful irony. Forcing yourself to turn to stone when your heart is bleeding out is exactly what makes you shatter into pieces. The audio design here is brilliant, highlighting the dead, rhythmic monotone of Lorenzo's voice as he recites the casualties. Russo's in Boston, Marino in Philadelphia, Greco in Miami, but the devastating climax arrives when he describes the jagged facial scar the terrified child traced in the moonlight. The silence that follows is absolute. Donna Isabella slowly presses her palms flat against the polished mahogany, meeting Lorenzo's gaze. "It is war," she whispers, the words slicing through the heavy air. Salvatore Vieri is coming for them. In the background, the hardened lieutenants visibly fracture. Stefano frantically crosses himself in the shadows, while Carmine clenches his jaw until the bone groans. It reveals a humbling truth about human nature. No matter how untouchable a person pretends to be, absolute terror will always drive them to their knees. The frame shifts to Tommy Castellano, leaning back into his leather chair with a deeply cynical, arrogant smirk. He is a man intoxicated by his own myth, carelessly striking a match in a room full of gasoline. He smoothly questions why they are betting a blood-soaked empire on the fragile memory of a 7-year-old child. When Lorenzo coldly defends her innocence, Tommy merely chuckles, dismissing the trauma as a fairy tale. Watch the subtle shift in his body language. He is deliberately probing the perimeter, testing the young king's restraint in a vicious game of supremacy, cloaked as reason. The tragedy of absolute power is captured in this single standoff. The blade that finally cuts your throat rarely belongs to the enemy outside the gate. It is almost always held by the brother sitting right beside you. The thin wire of tension violently snaps. Vincent slowly turns a dead, predatory stare toward Tommy, the unspoken promise of violence hanging thickly in the air. Before blood is spilled, Isabella slams the iron gate shut. Vivian stays, she decrees, her raspy voice echoing like the hammer of a revolver pulling back. She mandates absolute quarantine in the East Wing. No letters, no voices, nothing but the suffocating dark. Now, stick with me as the scene plunges into true psychological horror. They are not merely locking a woman behind a door. They are engineering a suffocating descent into madness, starving her sanity until the secrets bleed out. It forces us to confront a terrifying reality. The most excruciating torture never touches the flesh. It is simply locking a soul in a cold room with its own reflections. Pay close attention to the blocking in this scene. Lorenzo paces like a caged panther, dictating the total lockdown of the estate to bury Vivian in silence. You can read the dark psychology of the pack in their microscopic movements. Stefano and Carmine immediately lower their eyes, submitting to the alpha. But Tommy hesitates. It is a fleeting, half-second pause, but in this shadowy world of blood and pride, that hesitation is a drawn sword. Sensing the fracture, Lorenzo violently overcompensates, stationing his most ruthless sentinels at every exit to reclaim his absolute control. The tragic irony hangs heavy over the opulent room. We convince ourselves that we are building fortresses out of strategy and strength. But in truth, when the walls climb this high, it only proves how hopelessly terrified we are of the dark. Tommy continues his lethal dance, wrapping a venomous challenge in a velvet layer of polite suggestions. The camera pushes in on Lorenzo, and his response is a masterclass in psychological warfare. He does not shatter glasses or scream into the void. He simply stops moving. He fixes Tommy with eyes so hollow and cold, they seem plucked from a corpse. By withholding any emotion, he forces Tommy to drown in the suffocating weight of his own echoes. You can see the oxygen leave the room as Carmine and Stefano freeze, and Tommy nervously breaks eye contact, entirely defeated. We have all witnessed variations of this in our own lives. The man thrashing and shouting is merely begging for validation. Genuine, terrifying power never raises its voice, because it already knows exactly where the executioner's axe is kept. The heavy oak doors click shut, and the lighting shifts to cool, desolate blues as the foot soldiers exit. Vincent remains planted in the shadows, his face a canvas of mourning as he realizes the family foundation is turning to dust. Then, the guards escort Vivian into the lion's den. She is draped in luxurious cashmere, designed to make her look like a fragile, wounded dove, but observe her immediate choice. When they slide the porcelain teacup and warm food toward her, she does not even blink. She refuses it all. It is a breathtaking, silent act of warfare, denying them the absolute compliance they desperately crave. The deepest struggles of the human spirit are etched into this single frame. You can chain a person in the bleakest dungeon on earth, but true freedom is knowing they can never force you to swallow their poison. Stripping away that white wedding gown was never just a change of clothes. It was the shedding of a meticulously crafted skin. The terrified, submissive bride was a brilliant theatrical performance, a shield of pure survival, and the curtain has finally fallen. She sits directly across the polished wood from Lorenzo, radiating an unnerving stillness. Her ankles delicately crossed, hands perfectly folded. Not a tremor in her breath, not a bead of sweat on her porcelain brow. The sweet girl he loved has vanished, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath the surface. It is a profoundly unsettling revelation. The greatest monsters rarely hide in the shadows. They arrive perfectly dressed in the light. We believe we are holding a soulmate, only to discover we have embraced a mirror, reflecting our own fatal desires. The camera captures her face as a chilling, impassive mask of stone. Desperate to shatter her composure, Lorenzo violently slams the gruesome photograph of Market Zennett's corpse onto the table. He expects tears, a confession. Instead, Vivian barely shifts her gaze. She observes the blood-soaked image as if it were a misplaced piece of mail, coldly dismissing the dead man as a tragic, unstable alcoholic. She details his demise with the clinical detachment of a mortician reading a toe tag. There is zero hesitation in her throat, only a sprawling, terrifying void of empathy. It perfectly captures the dark art of a master manipulator. They can stare into the eyes of a ruined life and effortlessly rewrite reality without a pulse of guilt. For them, truth is never anchored to the past. It is merely the lie they choose to deliver with absolute conviction. The camera pushes in on the heavy mahogany table. Lorenzo does not yell. He barely breathes. He just gives a fraction of a nod to Vincent, and 3 glossy photographs slide under the low, dramatic lighting. A chilling gallery of the dead. First is Roberto Russo, dead at 48. Then Frank Marino, sinking into his honeymoon waters, the moment his ink dried on her deed. The lens captures the tragic horror in Lorenzo's dark eyes. This is not just betrayal. It is a meticulously crafted slaughter. We blind ourselves with the comforting illusion of coincidence, whispering that the world is random, just so we can sleep at night. But the hardest life lesson you will ever learn is this. When a pattern emerges from the shadows, dragging bodies in its wake, it is absolutely never an accident. The final photograph lands with a sickening thud. Antonio Greco, bleeding out in his driveway. The heavy silence in the library descends like a shroud, suffocating the room until the only sound is a ticking clock. Notice how the lighting catches the cold tremor in Vincent's posture as he steps back, overwhelmed by the ghosts of these men. Yet Vivian does not flinch. The lens focuses on her manicured fingers, entirely unbothered by the blood they spilled. Lorenzo lets the quiet stretch, weaponizing the void in a brilliant dance of psychological torment. There is a simple life lesson hidden in this quiet horror. Guilt absolutely despises empty space. Let the silence hang long enough, and a guilty soul will always hang itself, just to escape its own reflection. The camera locks onto her face, as the beautiful mask finally cracks. We desperately want a tearful confession. Instead, her delicate laugh twists into a harsh, metallic rasp. The room's lighting seems to chill as she leans forward, radiating the absolute boredom of an apex predator. She mocks Lorenzo, her voice dripping with venom. revealing that every dead man sat in that very chair, holding those exact photos, asking the same pathetic questions. She feels no sorrow, only annoyance at his predictability. You and I must carry the weight of this scene forever, because it teaches a brutal life lesson. Real monsters never hide in the shadows. They sit nurse directly across your dinner table, draped in silk and perfume, quietly laughing at you, because you actually dared to believe you were special. We linger on Vivian as she casually dismantles a titan. Watch the terrifying ease in her posture as she rips Lorenzo apart, laughing while comparing him to the men in the ground. Antonio figured it out faster, she whispers, yet his blood still painted the driveway. Then the ultimate blow lands. 5 years of grooming. Lorenzo was her masterpiece. The others were merely rough drafts. She discusses the manipulation of his heart, like someone picking out drapes for a house. The sheer megalomania is suffocating, turning their tragic romance to ash. There is a haunting life lesson buried in this wreckage. Sometimes the radiant warmth and affection you think you are receiving is not love at all. It is just the patient, quiet preparation for your complete and absolute destruction. Notice the exact frame where she rips away his final illusion of safety. Her eyes are devoid of pity as she tells him his stone fortress is a joke. The true architect of his downfall has been dining at his table all along. She gracefully checks the ornate clock, timing her psychological dagger to the very second. Suddenly, a deafening explosion ruptures the north gate. The massive crystal chandelier swings wildly, casting shattered shadow across Lorenzo's crumbling face. His perfectly orchestrated empire is turning to dust. It is a tragedy steeped in a profound life lesson. We spend entire lifetimes building towering fortresses out of wealth and control, completely blind to the agonizing truth that our very foundations have already been wired with explosives. The camera shakes violently as the second blast delay detonates. A breaching charge shatters the elegant stillness into deafening chaos. Radios scream with the voices of dying men, swallowed by the brutal rhythm of automatic gunfire. The furrows on Lorenzo's brow tighten as pure survival instinct takes over. Vincent pivots into military precision, barking frantic orders to secure the bloodline. But as the aging enforcer turns toward the door, he commits a tragic, irreversible error. He leaves his back exposed to Vivienne. She remains perfectly still in the madness, a chilling smile blooming on her lips. Here is a necessary life lesson paid for in blood. When the world is burning down outside your walls, never turn your back on the quiet, smiling poison, sitting directly at your own table. The frame captures the tragic collapse of ultimate power. When Lorenzo's empire shatters, the romantic veneer drops, revealing the cold animal beneath. He draws a hidden Glock 19, chambering around with the fluid muscle memory of a killer. But the true cinematic masterpiece unfolds in the shadowed East Wing. The lighting catches the dead calm in Donna Isabella's eyes. She unlocks her late husband's mahogany desk, retrieves a heavy Beretta, and racks the slide with a terrifying click. Decades of buried trauma have completely burned away her capacity for fear. She does not beg for a savior. This gives us an unforgettable life lesson. Panic makes you freeze and pray for a hero. But agonizing experience teaches you that when the walls finally cave in, you are the only one coming to save yourself. The camera contrasts the trembling young guard, choking on his own panic, with the statuesque stillness of Donna Isabella. She dismisses his frantic pleas to flee, her voice a gravelly echo of the brutal Sicilian bloodbaths of 1967. She did not survive hell just to cower in a dark cellar. Cut back to Lorenzo. He violently kicks open the library doors, his weapon raised, ready to put a bullet through his betrayer's heart. But the lens reveals only an empty room. The chair is completely vacant, the heavy oak doors slowly groaning in the draft. The sheer tragedy of his failure sinks in, leaving us with a bitter, necessary life lesson. The very moment you let yourself believe you have absolute control over your environment is the exact second someone else has completely outsmarted you. The camera lingers on the pristine lock. No forced entry. The betrayal is an intimate wound from inside his home. But Lorenzo cannot afford the luxury of heartbreak. Watch the light die in his eyes as he locks into unfeeling combat mode. He charges into the great hall, now drenched in the crimson glow of a slaughterhouse. Men, in tactical gear, pour through the walls. Lorenzo moves like a ghost, clinically executing 2 attackers with precision. When a third reaches for a blade, Lorenzo shoots him dead before the steel catches the light. No grand monologues, no tragic pauses, just the cold machinery of death. It leaves us with a deeply chilling life lesson. When ultimate betrayal finally kicks down your door, there is no time to ask why. You simply have to find a way to survive the violent answer. The frame catches the slight hesitation of the second assassin, a single heartbeat of fear that Lorenzo capitalizes on, dropping him against the wall. He erases 4 men in 30 seconds, a terrifying display of a soul hollowed by violence. The camera cuts upstairs as the shockwave rattles Elena's bedroom. Her harsh street instincts, carved from a childhood of chaos, ignite instantly. She drops to the floor, dragging little Sophia beneath the heavy shadow of an oak table. She curves her fragile body over the terrified child, offering her own flesh as a living shield against the nightmare. It is a tragic image that leaves us with a vital life lesson. Deep trauma physically trains your body to instinctively protect the innocent, long before your conscious mind can ever comprehend the terror. In the suffocating dark beneath the table, Elena crushes the little girl against her chest. The sound design isolates the terrifying thud of combat boots echoing down the marble hallway. Elena squeezes her eyes shut, her muscles locked in terror, bracing for the slaughter. Then, the tension shatters. A raspy, exhausted voice bleeds through the smoke. Vincent. The camera captures Elena, taking one jagged breath as the old enforcer drops to his knees beside them, his hardened eyes softening just for a fraction of a second. He quietly orders them to grab his coat. It is a beautifully tragic moment amidst the chaos, leaving us with this simple life lesson. True safety is rarely a sprawling stone fortress. Most of the time, it is simply the sudden, familiar sound of a trusted voice pulling you out of the dark. The camera trails them down the spiraling servant stairs. Vincent pushes them past the dusty wine racks until they reach a seamlessly hidden door in the stone. It is the literal architecture of a guilty conscience. With grim efficiency, he twists 2 keys and presses his palm against a scanner. The massive steel door sighs open, revealing a suffocating concrete tomb disguised as a sanctuary. Sterile monitors flicker, with the grotesque violence unfolding above. Vincent gently shoves the weeping mother and child into the steel box, locking them away from his sins. As the heavy door seals, it leaves us with a haunting, inevitable life lesson. The thicker the physical walls a person builds to keep the outside world at bay, the more deeply terrified they truly are of the inescapable consequences of their own dark actions. Harsh overhead lights carve deep shadows into Vincent's face as he commands Elena to secure the steel deadbolts. She must open the vault for no one but him, Lorenzo, or the Donna, completely ignoring any desperate screams outside. Elena simply nods, her expression hollow. It is tragic how those bound to violent men must numb their souls just to survive. Her past has erased her capacity to panic. Yet before turning away, the ice in Vincent's gaze fractures. He kneels, softly asking little Sophia to be brave one last time. The heavy iron door seals shut with the finality of a tomb. Stick with me, because this moment teaches us a bitter truth. True courage is never the magical absence of fear. True courage is the agonizing choice to sit patiently in the suffocating dark, right before the colossal door locks. Little Sophia presses against her mother. She whispers a chilling secret to Vincent, revealing she saw the man with the scarred face in his car just before the explosions began. The vault mechanism hisses, swallowing them in steel. On the surface, the terrifying violence is shockingly brief. 60 seconds of deafening gunfire leaves 8 attackers dead on the manicured lawn. 3 of Lorenzo's loyal guards lie motionless across shattered marble floors, while the Grand North Gate burns into smoking rubble. The suffocating silence that follows leaves us with an inescapable lesson. A man can spend his entire life building an untouchable empire of security, only to watch the cruel universe dismantle it all in 60 brutal seconds. Thick smoke pours from the blasted gates. Lorenzo stalks through the ruined ground floor, knuckles white around his heavy pistol. He steps over the bodies with the dead eyes of a man entirely desensitized to human ruin. Down in the bunker, he finds Vincent glued to the glowing surveillance monitors. Vincent freezes a terrifying frame just outside the library. Seconds after the first bomb detonated, a shadowy figure slipped down the stairs. The intruder angled his face away from the lens, exploiting the blind spots with chilling familiarity. This reveals the most terrifying life lesson of all. I crossed the street, grabbed his shirt. The absolute worst threats to your safety will never bother kicking down your front door. They already live inside your house, and they know exactly where the cameras point. Look closely with me, because this is where the story twists the blade. See that silver beard and the slight limp on the screen? That is Tommy Castellano pausing at the library to unlock the heavy oak door from the outside. 21 seconds later, Vivian Moretti ghosts down those back stairs, untouched by the carnage. Tommy simply locks the door and limps away. We watch Vincent staring at the grainy footage, and you can physically feel his soul leaving his body. He mutters that he knew it all along, yet the confirmation still breaks him. When an empire is built entirely on fear, loyalty is just a month-to-month rental. The bitterest lesson in this life: your enemies can never betray you. True betrayal always comes from the one person you trusted to hold your keys. Vincent pauses the video, realizing Tommy quietly copied that brass key years ago. Notice how smoothly it turns in the lock. Lorenzo's face hardens, coldly ordering his remaining soldiers to hunt them down, but Tommy is already gone, slipping past the burning lodge in a van. Lorenzo drops his gun on the console, telling his men to wake his grandmother. But this next frame gives you actual chills. Donna Isabella is already awake. She just reloaded her pistol and is pouring black coffee like it is a sunny Sunday morning, not the day death knocked at her door. It is a terrifying portrait of an absolute emotional void. The lesson here is brutal. True power never screams or panics when the world burns down around it. True power simply pours a fresh cup of coffee and calmly prepares to survive. Watch how the Donna takes this news. Not a single blink, not one interruption. When Vincent finishes detailing the slaughter, she sets her cup down and casually mentions their rival has planned this massacre for years. She knows Tommy is just a pawn. Nobody breaches a fortress this massive alone. Vincent murmurs they must follow the money, and she coldly agrees. She orders a ruthless dissection of every senior soldier and offshore account, demanding records of any dirty wires by sundown. Her dark authority is so absolute that the terrified crew delivers the files by 6 o'clock sharp. There is a deeply ironic lesson in this tragedy. A traitor can mask their face and bury their emotions, but human greed is always fatally sloppy. The devil never hides in the shadows. He hides in the accounting ledgers. Appreciate the dark irony in this next sequence. 2 trusted names bleed from the ledgers. Bobby Ferraro took 4 quiet wires of $20,000 through Lugano. Salato shows transfers from a Maltese front that Vincent instantly spots as a laundering trap. Lorenzo processes this betrayal without a flinch, ordering both men dragged in alive. While Vincent paces downstairs, whispering death sentences into an untraceable phone, the camera cuts to the concrete vault below. The visual contrast absolutely breaks your heart. Little Sophia is just sitting on the floor, quietly drawing. It offers a stark, beautiful lesson about survival. While grown men plot to tear each other apart for power, a child instinctively reaches for a crayon, trying to color some sense into an unimaginably broken world. Elena finds a faded yellow pad and some beat-up crayons on a dusty shelf. Showing a rigid obedience that screams of trauma, Sophia politely asks permission to use them. For an hour, the girl pours her fractured mind onto that paper. When Vincent enters the vault, she stands and hands it to him. He stares at this crude artifact, carrying it upstairs like it weighs 100 pounds. He slides it onto Lorenzo's desk under a green lamp. It is a chilling sketch of an old man, marked by one deliberate red crayon slash down his left cheek, looking exactly like dried blood. Here is the tragic lesson. The adult mind constantly rationalizes its fear, but a child's raw subconscious never forgets the face of a monster. That simple drawing is the purest witness statement ever recorded. The drawing is rough, but the terrifying accuracy hits you in the gut. Vincent instantly matches the rigid facial structure to his mental threat database. He recalls that exact hollow stare from a 2009 surveillance shot, and a 2022 photo from Marseille. The ultimate mob narcissist is staring back from a piece of cheap yellow paper. Vincent's voice drops to a heavy whisper as he names him, Salvatore Vieille. Lorenzo holds the fragile paper under the light, a dark realization washing over him. A little girl just handed them the invisible ghost they have spent years hunting. By 8 o'clock, the perimeter is completely locked down. The underlying lesson here is deeply humbling. The exact answers to our most violent problems often come from the most vulnerable among us, if we only stop to look. Let's look at this scene piece by piece, shall we? Lorenzo shifts into an absolute territorial lockdown. He shoves his targets into the East Wing, parking 2 enforcers at the door for 72 hours. But then, we get a massive emotional pivot. Lorenzo, a ruthless crime boss, clears his entire schedule for a terrified little girl. He sets up the morning room like a trauma clinic. Toast points, soft scrambled eggs, fresh peaches, and cold milk. This is not about feeding her. It is about establishing a psychological baseline of safety. He drops a heavy leather portfolio on the table and waits. Eventually, Sophia creeps in, her fingers glued to her mother's hand for dear life. It is a heavy reminder of a beautiful truth. True security cannot be forcefully bought with blood money. It can only be felt in moments of quiet, steady care. The visual contrast here is brilliant filmmaking. Sophia shuffles in wearing a soft yellow dress, looking completely alien inside the sterile, trauma-soaked walls of a mob bunker. Her hair is braided, and she is strangling a gray teddy bear, clinging to it like a life raft. Lorenzo completely drops his terrifying gangster persona. He speaks with a quiet gentleness, grabbed his shirt using textbook cognitive interview tactics to strip away all the pressure. He softly tells her there are no wrong answers. She just needs to look at some pictures and tell him if she recognizes anyone. Sophia gives a heartbreakingly serious nod and climbs into a massive armchair, pulling the bear tight to her chest. We learn a quiet lesson in this moment. When you treat broken people with genuine, patient gentleness, they will climb mountains for you. Inside that book are 43 faces pulled from bloody intelligence files. It is a dark family tree of the worst people on Earth. Lorenzo flips them one by one, keeping a slow, steady rhythm. For 11 tense pages, Sophia gently shakes her head, but on page 12, everything stops. The photo shows a lean man with dead pale eyes in a charcoal suit. Her fragile memory locks in instantly. She whispers that this man drank coffee with her dad twice, but what spooked her was that he never smiled. Not once. Kids do not listen to the lies adults say. They feel what adults hide, picking up on every terrifying micro-expression. Lorenzo does not say a single word. He just calmly slides that photograph across the mahogany table, silently sealing the man's brutal fate. The final lesson? You can fool a polygraph machine, but you can never fool a child. Her pattern recognition is absolutely flawless. On the 19th photo, she points out a heavy cassette guy, but remembering that he once screamed at her dad in the hallway. But the real breakthrough comes at photograph 27. It is a younger guy with dark hair. Sophia's memory totally unlocks. She says this man visited all the time and notes a bizarre quirk. He refused to ever take his coat off inside the house. She even remembers that her mother was terrified of him, absorbing all that silent tension in the living room. Lorenzo hears this devastating intelligence, but his face remains like stone. He does not even break eye contact with the pictures. He just softly calls out for Vincent, who steps from the shadows. The lesson we learn here is that our energy always enters a room before we do. Children can feel our true intentions long before we ever speak a word. Lorenzo taps the photograph. Vincent leans in, and though he tries to stay stoic, you can actually hear his breathing hitch. He knows this face. It is Lorenzo Bianchi, the right-hand man to their rival boss. The brutal math is done in seconds. If Bianchi was running operations in Boston years ago, he is definitely here now. The hunt is officially on. And while these two killers silently declare war, look at Sophia. She has just dismantled an entire criminal cell's security network in 7 minutes, and she is calmly chewing on a slice of peach. Her brain has completely normalized this terrifying reality. Lorenzo watches her for a long second. In a rare moment of humanity, he gently smooths back a stray piece of hair from her braid. The lesson here is beautifully tragic. Human resilience is a miracle, but it is deeply heartbreaking what person to become that strong. You and I have probably both seen how people cope when their world gets turned upside down. Down in the kitchen, Alina is showing a textbook survival response. The head cook finds her pressing both hands flat against the wooden butcher block, literally trying to ground herself to reality. Elena demands to be put to work, pointing out the 40 armed guards who need to eat. She is desperately trying to earn her safety by being useful, a tragic trauma response from years of captivity. The cook just looks at her, understands immediately, and hands her an apron. By noon, Elena is cooking relentlessly, using the intense physical labor to silence the screaming echoes of trauma in her head. The lesson is clear. Sometimes, the hardest work we do isn't about the job itself. It is just a desperate attempt to keep our own minds from falling apart. Let us pause right here and study the framing of this exact moment. The camera lingers on Elena in a sweltering kitchen, sleeves pushed up, frantically browning meat for the guards. It is a desperate, wordless plea for worth. From the deep shadows, Donna Isabella watches. Then comes the ultimate transfer of power. The matriarch's trembling fingers unclasp her gold St. Anne medallion, a relic anchored to her chest for 50 years. The heavy gold scrapes across the wooden table. It is a coronation. She is silently declaring that your child survived, making you untouchable. Elena's throat tightens. Her eyes glass over, but she forces the emotion back down. In this brutal reality, a single tear invites the wolves. It teaches us a harsh truth. Sometimes the absolute strongest thing you can do is simply keep your child breathing. Meanwhile, in the muted light of the nursery, we are hit with an absolute emotional gut punch. Little Sophia lets out a laugh. It is a rusty, broken sound, as if her tiny vocal cords forgot the shape of joy after the blood-soaked trauma of the wedding. Watching from the doorway, Lorenzo completely freezes. You can see the heavy gears grinding behind his dark eyes. As the realization washes over him, his daughter finally feels safe. But tragedy never lets a man rest. At 7 p.m, the fragile peace is violently shattered by a buzzing phone. Vincent sends 3 agonizing words. They have Bianchi. We smash cut to a freezing, pitch-black Brooklyn warehouse. A single naked bulb sways slowly above 2 hitmen smoking in the bitter cold. The harsh lesson is impossible to ignore. For those born into a war zone, peace is never owned. It is always just a temporary rental. Stick with me, because you and I need to unpack the pure psychological horror of this interrogation scene. Bianca sits beneath a swaying industrial light, but notice what the director leaves out. There are no thick ropes, no bruised knuckles. The man still has his shoelaces tied and a fresh coffee on his knee. This is mental decimation on a different plane. When flesh is beaten, the spirit has an enemy to fight. Without violence, you simply drown in the suffocating water of your own dread. Bianca does not look terrified. His slumped shoulders radiate a soul-crushing exhaustion. Then, Lorenzo slowly drags a metal chair across the concrete, stopping inches from Bianca's knees. He dominates the room without raising a single fist. We all eventually learn this truth, the quietest. Most patient threats are always the ones that finally break a human mind. Pay close attention to the visual contrast in this tight space. The camera frames Vincent, looming on the edge of the shadows, practically breathing down the captive's neck. Lorenzo takes a totally different path. He keeps his voice dead quiet, flat out telling Bianchi that no one will lay a finger on him. It completely scrambles the man's fragile sanity. Then, Lorenzo calmly targets the fatal weak spot. He brings up Salvatore Vieri, the narcissistic parasite, who consumes his own inner circle to maintain power. Without a blink, Lorenzo lists the buried bodies of Vieri's last 3 captains across Sicily, Malta, and Lisbon. He forces Bianchi to stare at his own, rapidly approaching expiration date. It is a bitter pill to swallow for anyone under a toxic leader. Giving your loyalty to someone who only loves their own reflection is nothing more than a slow suicide note. Lorenzo continues to slowly twist that psychological knife. He leans in close, his eyes hollow, reminding Bianchi that he personally grabbed a steel shovel to bury 2 of those forgotten men. You can see a muscle twitch in Bianca's jaw as the foundation of his reality crumbles into dust. Then comes the inescapable ultimatum. Give up the boss and walk out alive. But the tension spikes because the offer vanishes the exact second Lorenzo stands up to leave. The director holds us in 8 agonizing seconds of dead silence. Bianchi is frantically running the math behind his desperate eyes. Finally, his spirit snaps. There are no weeping tears, no grand cinematic redemption. It is just a broken man choosing breath over a sociopath. The grim truth of human nature is that when the water reaches your chin, survival will always cancel out blind loyalty to a sinking ship. Shattered, Bianchi spills the architectural blueprints onto the cold table. It is Penthouse 3, packed with fake hotel staff carrying heavy artillery by the elevators. Vieri's massive ego demanded he be in the city to personally steal the Duca crown, a prize he has obsessed over for a decade. The camera pushes in as Lorenzo coldly demands the original plan. Bianchi's fight-or-flight response is completely burned out, so the dark truth floods out. Vivian was supposed to marry Lorenzo, then casually slip him a tasteless chemical to induce a fatal heart attack. No loud gunfire in the streets. Just a weeping widow inheriting a blood-soaked empire on a silver platter. It is a terrifying realization that the most devastating betrayals do not come from strangers. The most dangerous enemies we ever face might just be the ones sleeping right next to us. The camera lingers on Lorenzo as the sheer terror of the plot is laid bare. Vivian was meant to claim the throne, allowing Vieri to slide in as her partner and consume the Duca Empire without a gunshot. Hearing this ultimate betrayal, Lorenzo does not flinch. His face is chiseled from cold marble. He only asks what fractured the plan. Bianchi stares at the floorboards, whispering that it was Sofia. They never knew the child existed, forcing Vieri to turn a sacred wedding into a chaotic bloodbath, just to measure loyalty. It is a haunting display of psychological manipulation, a desperate scramble to convince the underworld that Lorenzo is dead. It leaves us with a painful truth. A true narcissist will burn down the family home, just to prove they can control the ashes. You and I must watch this frame closely, because this is where our heartbreaking tragedy twists into a cold revenge thriller. The lighting shifts as Bianchi confesses the traitors are gathering at the Duca family mausoleum in Greenwood Cemetery. Vivian plans to play the weeping widow, waiting for Vieri to claim his blood-stained prize. Vincent stands in the shadows, shattered by the profound disrespect to their father, but Lorenzo remains perfectly still. Then, slowly, the edge of his mouth curls. It is the freezing, hollow grin of a starving wolf who realizes the sheep have locked themselves inside his cage. He leans forward and whispers, "Well then, never mistake quiet patience for weakness, my friends. They might just be meticulously building your trap. We will give them a funeral," Lorenzo announces, slowly rising from the desk. A heavy silence falls as he gives a slight nod, and the guards immediately step away from Bianchi. It is a terrifying power move, offering mercy simply to prove he holds the power of life and death. Bianchi boards a flight out of Newark before midnight. Stepping into the biting Brooklyn wind, Lorenzo commands his men to summon every loyal boss remaining. By 11, His father's oak study is suffocating with dangerous men. Lorenzo sinks into the weathered leather chair under a single green lamp. He unfolds a map of the cemetery like a surgeon preparing to carve out a cancer. To protect the innocent souls you cherish most, you sometimes have to become the very monster you swore to destroy. Let us step into this room together, because the visual tension is breathtaking. Vincent grips a porcelain cup, his knuckles white, desperate to hide his trembling hands. Donna Isabella sits deep in an armchair, a scuffed beretta resting in her lap like a television remote. The 6 surviving bosses form a tight half-circle, casting long shadows, bowing to Lorenzo as the undisputed king. He skips the speeches and drops the crushing truth. Vieri thinks I am dead. He thinks my grandmother is locked away, and he thinks he has won. The arrogance of calling a victory rally at the sacred tomb of their ancestors is staggering. It is a tragic reminder that ego is always the loudest voice in the room, right before it drives you blindly over the cliff. Picture this, you and I watching from the shadows of a smoke-choked room. Vieri's twisted tragedy isn't merely his thirst for blood. It's a parasitic hunger. He wants to wear Lorenzo's suits and watch Vivienne weep by the headstone before he puppets the shattered Duca family. Lorenzo lets the heavy silence stretch, the amber light catching the cold certainty in his eyes before his finger taps the map. Tomorrow at sunset, a hearse crawls toward the gates with a sealed casket. Let the cameras flash. Let the whispers spread. They will spoon-feed Vieri, the exact lie his arrogance craves. It's a quiet truth we all must face eventually. Feed a man's vanity and delusions with enough care, and he will eagerly dig his own grave, simply to prove to the world that he knows how to hold a shovel. Lorenzo isn't simply mapping a bloodbath. He is choreographing a masterpiece of misery. The camera lingers on his face as he orders his men to slouch, casting their eyes down like beaten dogs, stripped of their master. Show weakness, and Vieri struts blindly into the snare. Stefano gives a slow nod, shadows carving deep lines into his jaw. Lorenzo traces the timeline. The meeting is at 9, but the enemy will arrive early. Slowly, Lorenzo drags his finger across the rough paper, tapping the shed, the chapel, and the bell tower bordering the graves. It reveals a harsh reality about any conflict we face. Victory never comes from the struggle itself, but from the quiet discipline of choosing your battlefield while your opponent is still fast asleep. Each stone structure looms over the Duca plot, with terrifying clarity. Lorenzo's voice drops into a hollow register. Heavy rifles in all 3 nests by 8, and nobody breathes until the signal. The room grows agonizingly thick before Carmine asks the ultimate question: where will Lorenzo be? The boss stares right through him. I will be inside the casket. He intends to rise from the dead, fracturing their sanity, seconds before the brass falls. Vincent slowly lowers his coffee cup, a slight tremor in his hand as he asks about Vivienne. Lorenzo's expression hardens into unyielding marble. She chose her path. It is a painful but necessary lesson we all must grasp. When you shatter the trust of those who loved you most, you forfeit the right to weep. When fate hands you the bill, let the camera push in on Donna Isabella. Her eyes open, and every ounce of warmth is extinguished. An emotional flatline. She realizes mercy is a deadly luxury when a traitor weaponizes a wedding gown to bury her grandson. The execution order is set for tomorrow. The men rehearse the choreography until it is pure muscle memory. She dismisses them, but Lorenzo cannot shut down. His jaw is locked, veins pulsing with adrenaline. At 2 a.m, unable to sleep, he creeps silently up the shadowy back staircase. He gently knocks on the blue bedroom door, and Elena slowly opens it. It reminds us of a dark but undeniable truth. When you launch a dagger into the heart of a devoted family, you don't merely create enemies. You completely erase their capacity to ever feel pity for you. You and I know how surviving a war zone warps a person's baseline for normal. Elena doesn't flinch when Lorenzo materializes at 2 a.m. She simply opens the door. Inside, 7-year-old Sophia sits rigid, her small fingers crushing a stuffed bear. Children always absorb the terror adults try to hide. Lorenzo sinks onto the mattress, fighting to soften the lethal predator he has become. He presses a cold brass key into Elena's trembling palm. A safe house on East 64th. Cash. New names. An escape hatch if tomorrow's slaughter fails. It proves a profound lesson in human duty. True protection is never about whispering empty promises in the dark. It is about building an open door long before the walls finally begin to crush the ones you care about. The camera captures the agonizing wait as Lorenzo holds her gaze. "Wait for me," he commands. "But if tomorrow ends in a body bag, the sanctuary is hers." Elena crushes the key to her chest like a life raft, hot tears carving down her face. Her voice cracks, begging to know why a ruthless boss would save a lowly cook and her child. This frame shatters the heart. Lorenzo pauses, turning his heavy gaze to the tiny girl on the mattress, the child who stared down a room of killers without blinking. The monster vanishes, leaving a broken man. He confesses she brought the only genuine light his dark world had left. It leaves us with a beautiful truth. Your worth is never measured by your wealth or title, but by the pure, unyielding courage you bring into a room full of hollow fakes. Lorenzo kneels in the dim light, whispering that while the world drowns him in lies, Sophia is his only reality. Elena stands frozen, pressing the cold metal key to her trembling lips. The camera lingers as the child raises her tiny arms. This ruthless architect of violence leans down, letting her fragile hands clasp his neck. Her stuffed bear presses against his suit, absolute innocence clinging to destruction. "Be careful, Mr. Renzo," she whispers, terrified of the scarred man. He kisses her forehead and walks away. Downstairs, the Glock rests on the mahogany desk. His fingers find the grip, the killer awakening. It is a quiet truth. No matter how deep into the dark you wander, one moment of pure innocence can completely anchor your soul. The second his hand wraps around that cold grip, the deadness returns to his eyes. He is fully committed to the bloodbath. Let us walk into the fog together, you and I, as the scene cuts to Greenwood Cemetery at 9 o'clock. It is a sprawling city of the dead. Thick harbor mist chokes the air between tilted stone crosses, creating a sensory void above thousands of buried bodies. At the end of the avenue, the massive Duca tomb stands, with its heavy iron doors cracked open after 11 years. A black casket rests out front, gleaming in the mist like a trap. It reveals a brutal life lesson: you can build the heaviest monuments to hide your deepest sins, but the past will always claw its way back to the surface. A white wreath rests on the casket, a beautiful prop designed to sell the lie. 6 loyal men stand like stone gargoyles in the mist, heads bowed to mimic the crushing weight of grief. Stefano anchors the foot of the box, shoulders trembling. His eyes look so hollow you would swear his soul was ripped away. It is a masterpiece of deception. Then, at 3 minutes to 9, headlights pierce the fog. Tommy steps out of a sleek town car, radiating sickening arrogance. He swaggers up the damp path, like a man who believes he already owns the empire. He walks right past Stefano, completely blind to the danger breathing next to him. It is a timeless lesson for us all. Unchecked arrogance is the absolute heaviest blindfold a human being can ever wear. Tommy offers a dismissive nod to the casket, looking at the varnished wood like it is garbage rotting in the street. It is a stunning display of pure disrespect. Out of the fog, the other traitors trickle into the light. Bobby and Sal shift their weight, sweating through their expensive suits, while Joey lingers nervously near the gates. Then, the graveyard falls dead silent. Vivian steps onto the grass in a severe black gown, but notice the framing: she wears no mourning veil. She wants to play the devastated widow, yet her soaring ego simply refuses to cover her face. A smug, electric delight practically hums beneath her pale skin. This offers a vital truth about human nature. Profound vanity will always burn right through the deepest lies you ever try to tell. The mist parts as the architect of this nightmare makes his entrance. Salvatore steps from the gloom, looking like the terrifying monster ripped straight from little Sophia's drawings. He towers over everyone in a charcoal coat. The pale cemetery light catches the jagged scar tearing down his cheek, a permanent roadmap of his violent history. The man breathes absolute ice. He marches up to the casket and presses his bare palm against the wood, defiling the sacred boundary of the dead. "Here we are," he whispers in Italian, drunk on the intoxicating thrill of his own dominance. The lesser men bow their heads, and Vivian glides to his side like a moth to a dark flame. Let this be a lesson to remember true monsters never hide under the bed. They walk proudly out in the open. Salvatore turns to his crew, his cold voice slicing through the fog as he declares the Empire changes hands tonight. His ego practically swallows the headstones. He commands them to embrace Vivian as their queen, and himself as the iron fist behind her. "Any objections?" he asks. Only suffocating silence answers. Complete submission. Vivian cannot hide her toxic smile, whispering how she will inherit every dime and burn the loyalists to ash. Salvatore chuckles, promising to sweep their enemies away like dead leaves. But right at that peak of godlike arrogance, a sharp, metallic click echoes from the bell tower high above. A firing pin engaging. It is a brutal reminder the exact moment you proudly declare yourself untouchable is the very second your grave is dug. 3 massive tiers of stadium lights erupt, violently severing the darkness. The ancient graveyard and Vieri himself are instantly blinded by an unforgiving, hospital-white glare. Picture the scene with me. The bitterest part of treason is how quickly your swagger evaporates when the shadows are stripped away. Vieri recoils as the heavy oak casket violently bursts open. And who rises from this mock grave? Lorenzo Duca, dressed in charcoal, weapon steady, stepping onto the crushed stone like the Grim Reaper incarnate. Notice how Vivian's smug smile rots into sheer panic as 30 armed men materialize from the fog, locking them in a circle of iron and judgment. No matter how perfectly you sculpt a lie in the dark, the blinding truth will always shatter it to dust. High above the cold marble, the crumbling bell tower sparkles with the glint of sniper rifles. The rats are suffocated, boxed in from every conceivable angle. Vincent casually strolls from the shadows of a mausoleum, a short carbine resting in his hands. Lorenzo's voice cuts through the mist like a rusted blade. "You came to my family ground. That was your final mistake." But narcissists cling to the delusion of invincibility. Vieri dives a trembling hand into his coat, and the night tears open. Deafening gunfire rains from the heavens, erasing 2 men before they can draw breath. Stefano ruthlessly puts a round right through Bobby's chest. It stands as a bloody, tragic reminder. Supreme arrogance will eternally blind you to the grave dug right at your own feet. Salado succumbs to terror, sprinting before a shotgun blast from the chapel throws him to the earth. Joey shatters, raising trembling hands to the sky. Tommy attempts to play the swift gunslinger, but is painfully outmatched by a veteran like Vincent. 2 deafening cracks ring out. 2 rounds shatter Tommy's chest, folding him backward over the casket stands. The sheer horror of the ambush breaks the surviving men, forcing them to their knees on the jagged gravel. Meanwhile, Vivian abandons her royal facade, scurrying between the ancient gravestones like a cornered animal. This violent chaos reveals a harsh, undeniable truth. Our genuine character is only unearthed in the frantic, breathless seconds when our carefully constructed world utterly collapses into dust. Reason abandons Vieri as he rips out a chrome pistol, firing wildly. A bullet shatters the shoulder of Vincent's man behind a granite cross. The squad unleashes hell, but the old mobster stays horrifyingly fast. He runs like a rabid dog back to an abyss, sprinting around the towering mausoleum. But walk with me here, Lorenzo is already 10 steps ahead. He predicted this desperate flight the moment the lights flared. As Vieri rounds the freezing marble corner, Lorenzo steps directly into his path. They nearly collide in the claustrophobic gap between the tomb and an iron fence. Both men completely freeze. It is a heavy truth we all face. You can run from your sins, but eventually your dark actions forge an unyielding wall you simply cannot outrun. Picture the devastating framing of this scene. Gunfire tears through the monuments behind them, punctuated by a rifle crack that places a brutal period on the slaughter. Between Lorenzo and this megalomaniac lies exactly 5 meters of frosted November grass. 9 agonizing years of grief culminate right here, locking eyes with weapons raised in the frigid night. Slowly, the distant screams fade. The cemetery plunges into a ringing, hollow silence, the profound shock of a mind refusing to accept the nightmare it just endured. Neither man twitches a muscle in the freezing shadow of the tomb. Sometimes, the only way to genuinely sever the darkest chapter of your life is to plant your feet in the cold earth and stare your worst demon straight in the eyes. Let the camera linger here and study this standoff with me. Their weapons remain perfectly steady, while the creeping fog wraps around their knees like funeral shrouds. And then, horrifyingly, Vieri smiles. This is no mask of courage. It is the twisted smirk of a man whose ego is so gargantuan he believes he is untouchable. His voice drips with dark amusement, asking Lorenzo if he honestly believes a single bullet cures the rot. He boasts that his bloody empire will effortlessly crown a new king, and the Duca family hit list will endure long after his own blood stains the grass. It is the bleakest truth of human nature. Toxic legacies operate like a deeply rooted sickness. They almost always outlive the very monsters who first breathed them into existence. Lorenzo does not flinch. His eyes are hollow pits as he coldly replies that the war may rage on, but Vieri will be rotting in the dirt, blind to it. The decaying mobster searches Lorenzo's face, desperate to uncover a fracture of fear. He coldly mocks the memory of Lorenzo's father, laughing that the man succumbed to a weak heart before Vieri could slaughter him. Lorenzo absorbs the blow like a marble statue. Enraged by the silence, Vieri twists the blade deeper, casually tossing out the name Marcus Bennett, fully aware of the agonizing trauma attached to it. Cruel manipulators will endlessly try to weaponize your deepest, most sacred grief to maintain control, yet offering them absolute, unbreakable silence is the heaviest armor you can possibly wear. Vieri dissects the memory with cruelty. He describes how Marcus wept like an infant on Route 17, begging for his family before the final shot. The tyrant feasts on that panic, sneering that all men turn pathetic at the end. The camera catches the tight lock of Lorenzo's jaw, the solitary tremor of volcanic rage in his chest. Lorenzo delivers a heavy blow, stating coldly that Marcus's 7-year-old daughter possessed more courage than Vieri could muster in 60 hollow years. The insult pierces the narcissist's core. Vieri's smirk hardens into frost, spitting that his singular regret is failing to butcher that child. True evil never sheds a tear of remorse for the agony it sows. It only burns with furious resentment over the survivors it failed to erase. The monster casually muses about the night. He spared the little girl, shrugging that Vivian had foolishly talked him down. That indifference is the fatal trigger. Lorenzo's gun barks a single syllable. A calculated round obliterates Vieri's right shoulder, tearing muscle to ribbons. The pistol slips from the tyrant's paralyzed fingers as he collapses against the rusted iron railing, but watch the tragedy unfold. Lorenzo steps forward, utterly consumed by his own blinding vengeance. His focus is locked on the bleeding king. He fails to see Vivian emerging like a ghost from the fog, quietly raising her weapon at his spine. When we become furiously obsessed with destroying our grandest demons, we blind ourselves to the quiet, lethal blades drawn right at our own backs. She stands barely 8 feet from his back, eyes iced over, prepared to end his life. But Vivian never pulls that trigger. A dry, flat crack echoes from the shadows of the mausoleum. It is a small weapon, fired at point-blank range with absolute indifference. Vivian jolts. Her gun tumbles into the frosted grass as her body folds in half, dissolving into the dirt like a forgotten shadow. As the smoke clears, Donna Isabella Duca, Lorenzo's ancient grandmother, steps into the harsh light, calmly lowering a smoking vintage Beretta. Her weathered face resembles carved granite, completely devoid of emotion. We spend so much time checking the dark corners for roaring monsters, forgetting that the absolute quietest figures in the room often harbor the most devastating strength of all. A ribbon of smoke drifts lazily from the Beretta. Isabella's gaze is a terrifying void, wearing that hollow expression unique to those who have survived a lifetime of trauma. She glances at the corpse, checks on her grandson, and aims her dead eyes at the ruined megalomaniac. She whispers a cold reminder that she survived the slaughterhouse streets of Sicily in 1967. And Vieri? He laughs. Blood pours over his coat, yet his titanic ego violently rejects reality. He mockingly praises the old woman, then turns his rabgabs towards Lorenzo, demanding the final bullet. A diseased ego will always crave a cinematic, violent execution. For a narcissist, dying in a blaze of glory is infinitely easier than choking on the humiliating ash of total, absolute defeat. Lorenzo gazes down at the bleeding king and utters a single word. No, you and I need to truly appreciate the poetry of this climax. By denying that final bullet, Lorenzo shatters the old man's twisted mythology. With chilling calm, he recites the ledger of Vieri's sins, over 4 decades from burying rivals in the mud to hunting a 7-year-old child. He tells the trembling boss that a quick death is a mercy he has not earned. Lorenzo dials the federal agents, instructing them to bring the indictments to the cemetery. He is caging the monster alive and broken. Real justice is never found in simply mirroring your abuser's brutal violence. True justice is stepping away, leaving them entirely powerless, and letting the dark empire they built quietly crumble into dust. The line goes dead, leaving Vieri staring up at the unforgiving dirt, paralyzed by the sudden collapse of his empire. In a mere 48 hours, the natural order of the world violently resets. Harsh blue police lights slice through the thick graveyard fog, and aerial photographs dominate every morning paper. The phantom they hunted across 3 continents, agonizing for 19 years, is now handcuffed to a bleak Brooklyn hospital bed, bleeding from a shattered shoulder. He is dragged before a judge to face 412 separate charges, leaving rival cities fighting over his cage. The criminal underworld trembles in the fallout. It shows us that, no matter how untouchable a monster believes himself to be, the universe always arrives to collect its heavy debt in the end. Let us pull back the curtain on this trial together, because it reveals how these crime syndicates actually bleed out. The terrifying enforcers are buried, and the survivors are weeping for plea deals, terrified of rotting in a cell. Yet the true heartbreak is the silent woman lying on a cold steel table in the morgue. Born Victoria Esposito in 1995, she was dragged from a convent at 16. Vieri spent 9 grueling years, carving away her innocent soul, until she became his unfeeling weapon. This was not merely organized crime. This was a man playing God, mutilating a young girl's mind. When you surrender your reality to a toxic controller, you stop being a person and become nothing but a tragic tool for their endless madness. 3 days after the gavel drops, Lorenzo slowly closes the massive case file. He lets it fall onto his desk with chilling emotional detachment. The camera tracks backward as he summons Donna Isabella. She glides in wrapped in gray cashmere, looking every bit the seasoned matriarch, yet her wrinkles carry a faint trace of relief. Lorenzo stares into the shadows and drops a seismic bomb. He quietly tells his grandmother that he is walking away from this blood-soaked throne forever. Isabella does not gasp. She does not even blink. She crossed the street, grabbed his shirt. She simply looks her grandson dead in the face and softly confesses she has been waiting to hear those exact words since he was a bruised 8-year-old boy. We spend so much of our lives suffocating inside the psychological cages our families build for us. But the beautiful truth is, all it takes is one brave choice to finally tear down those iron bars. The camera pushes in slowly on Lorenzo, his silhouette carved by the harsh light of the study. This is his final gambit. He outlines a brutal amputation. 70% of their empire, the Manhattan hotels, the upstate trucking routes, the restaurant groups will be dragged into the unforgiving light, completely sanitized within 12 months. The malignant 30%? Severed entirely. Isabella sits motionless, shadows clinging to her face in stunned silence as he explains he is abandoning the dark. He is slicing out a generational cancer, praying the healthy tissue left behind will not wither in the sun. The tragedy of growth is that to save the soul, you must often slaughter your own history. Let us freeze the frame right here. You and I need to appreciate the suffocating irony in this room. Lorenzo stands at a table of hard-hot killers, pitching a future of baking bread and stocking vending machines. Vincent, an enforcer whose hands have ended lives, turns toward the window, a faint smile breaking through his scarred face. He understands the play. The old guard lieutenants clench their jaws, their egos bruised, but Lorenzo drops his ultimate trump card. He looks into their cold eyes and offers them the door. Defect to the enemy. 0 debts. 0 blood. By throwing the cage door wide open, he masterfully disarms their violent pride. The lesson is profound. True loyalty is never built by locking the gates, but by daring the captive to simply walk away. The camera captures the surreal disbelief of the men who stay. Lorenzo tells these career criminals he is paying for their schooling. The absurdity hangs in the air until Donna Isabella, a matriarch with veins of ice, lets out a soft, genuine laugh. She steps close, her trembling fingers grazing his shoulder. She whispers that he finally has his grandfather's voice, that his murdered parents would be proud. Lorenzo's hardened mask shatters, utterly robbed of words. He simply covers her frail hand with his own. Later, standing alone by the tall window, the physical weight of paranoia finally dissolves. For the first time in his tragic life, the morning breeze is just a breeze. It is a quiet reminder that even the deepest, most agonizing wounds can eventually find peace. Stick with me here, because you and I need to witness this cinematic miracle. As the morning fog rolls off the estate, the lens focuses on a man in a maintenance uniform. He walks the perimeter, gripping a simple clipboard instead of a shotgun. Lorenzo watches from the balcony. That exhausting predator instinct, the bone-deep dread of the next assassination attempt, has vanished from his posture. Flash forward 6 months. The brooding sentinels in black suits are gone, replaced by relaxed guards carrying paperwork. The most terrifying syndicate stronghold in the city has been reborn as a quiet, gated community. Letting go of 80 years of bloodshed proves a beautiful truth. The ultimate victory is never about conquering your enemies, but finally outgrowing the desperate need to fight them. The set design tells a story of radical redemption. The terrifying iron gates at the north entrance have been ripped from their hinges, replaced by delicate climbing roses. The brooding gardens are now bathed in sunlight, scattered with wicker chairs beneath a wooden pergola. The hidden gun cabinets, once slick with gun oil, sit hollow and bare. In the most poetic twist of fate, the subterranean panic room, a concrete bunker designed to outlast bloody Mafia sieges, is now quietly aging racks of fine wine. The fortress built to hold the grim reaper at bay has surrendered to the mundane beauty of ordinary existence. It teaches us that peace is not a grand, sweeping declaration. True peace is found in the beautifully boring safety of a house that is finally allowed to just be a home. Pay close attention to the shifting power dynamics. You and I know how these dark hierarchies operate, where loyalty is bought with fear. The compound is no longer a tomb of secrets. Lorenzo attempts to wash his guilt away, offering Elena a 6-figure corporate job and a luxury car. Watch her body language. She stares at the massive payout, calmly folds the paper, and slides it back. She looks into the eyes of this former mob boss and refuses. She states she is a cook, demanding her own space and an honest wage. She is totally rejecting the poisoned chalice of Mafia patronage. In this beautiful moment of defiance, we learn that true freedom cannot be handed down by a guilty king. Freedom must be claimed by looking the powerful in the eye and demanding to live entirely on your own terms. The camera catches a miracle. Lorenzo actually laughs out loud. It is a raw, genuine sound escaping a man who has worn a death mask for years. By afternoon, he grants Elena a private carriage house with a sunlit custom kitchen. Little 8-year-old Sophia is finally shown, riding her bike across the grass, no longer tracked by snipers hiding in the trees. The timing matriarch, Donna Isabella, softens her rigid posture, personally venturing out to buy the child a leather school bag. She is playing the doting grandmother. Lorenzo even sets up a quiet charity in her murdered father's name to fund her schooling. They are laundering their blood-soaked legacy, teaching us that the greatest apology you can ever offer an innocent soul is the pure gift of a safe, beautifully boring life. The tragic irony is that little Sophia remains blissfully blind to the history funding her quiet reality. By Christmas, her night terrors fade. By February, her laughter rings over dinners. Come April, she possesses the unburdened nerve to correct Lorenzo on his Italian pronunciation. The former boss sits in the soft evening light, patiently guiding her hand over a chessboard. Elena leans against the doorframe, her face caught in a conflicted shadow. Against every law of nature, this ruthless killer has become the tender father her broken husband failed to be. Meanwhile, Vincent, the brutal enforcer, is joyfully running clean restaurants. It is a profound realization that once was destroyed lives can learn by Sphinade, can learn to build sanctuaries, proving that grace often blooms in the darkest soil. Cut to Vincent, whose brutal past is written in his scars, now anxiously adjusting table settings at a restaurant. The camera lingers on his genuine smile. But the true cinematic pivot is Donna Isabella. For a decade, her dinner parties were venomous traps. Tonight, the lighting is warm, practically glowing. 6 mismatched souls sit together. Fresh flowers, flickering candles, and a beautiful opera record spinning in the corner. She is orchestrating pure affection, not an ambush. As the plates are cleared, Lorenzo rises slowly at the head of the table. He lifts his crystal glass, his eyes sweeping over this fractured, makeshift family. It is a quiet reminder that family is not always the blood you inherit, but the broken pieces you choose to pull yourself out of the absolute dark. The camera pushes in as Lorenzo raises his glass, his voice thick with emotion. He toasts to their survival, his gaze resting on the little girl clutching a worn gray bear. She is the anchor that dragged them back from madness. Sophia beams, a smile that lights the frame. The crystal glasses meet with a delicate chime. The opera swells. Somewhere deep in the manor, an old clock frozen for bitter years begins a steady, rhythmic ticking. Time, so long trapped in trauma, is finally moving forward. The haunted fortress is just a home. We avoid the bloody climax we expected. Instead, we are left with a powerful truth. Offering one traumatized child the basic human dignity she deserves has the power to shatter generational curses and completely rewrite destiny. Let the screen fade to black as we sit with this heavy truth. You and I have been conditioned to expect the tough guy with the gun to save the day. But the most redemptive words in any crisis never come from the hardened boss with the heavy pockets. Sometimes, the only force strong enough to halt a generational slaughter is the absolute weakest person in the room, a fragile child in hand-me-down clothes. One raw, unprotected moment of innocence can shatter decades of calcified violence. The lesson written in this tragedy is profound. Look at your own life. Pay close attention to those who hold absolutely no power over you. Listen to the quiet ones, because they are often the only souls brave enough to look you in the eye and show you the painful, undeniable truth. As the credits roll, remember this. You and I spend so much time picking apart the darkest corners of the human psyche, searching for meaning in the violence. But the most profound truths always emerge from the most vulnerable places. If this cinematic breakdown of power, irony, and tragic fate struck a chord deep in your chest, hit that like button, share this piece, and subscribe as we explore the films that haunt us. Tell me below, when has a soft, innocent voice pierced through your own noise to reveal a truth you were terrified to face? I read every word you leave. Remember, the fragile ego lies to protect itself, but pure innocence rarely does. Keep your empathy alive, stay out of the bitter shadows, and I will see you in the next frame. Take care of yourselves.
Vivienne Moretti's role in the story teaches a serious lesson about appearances and manipulation. She enters the wedding as the perfect bride, elegant, beautiful, calm, and socially acceptable. To the guests, she appears to be the ideal woman for Lorenzo Duca. But Sophia's accusation and the investigations reveal that Vivian's perfection is a mask. She is connected to a larger pattern of deception, targeting powerful men, gaining their trust, and helping destroy them from within. This is an important educational lesson. These dangerous people do not always look dangerous. Sometimes they are charming, polished, patient, and socially skilled. Vivian's power comes from her ability to appear harmless while studying people's weaknesses. She does not attack with obvious violence at first. She enters through romance, trust, and performance. That makes her especially dangerous. In real life, manipulation often works the same way. A person may present themselves as loving, supportive, or innocent while quietly using emotional access for selfish purposes. The story encourages viewers to be careful with people who seem too perfect, especially when they enter someone else's life quickly and ask for trust before earning it. It also teaches that evidence matters. Sophia's memory opens the door, but Lorenzo does not rely on emotion alone. He gathers photographs, testimony, financial clues, and patterns from other families. This balance is important. Believe people enough to investigate, but seek facts before making final decisions. Vivian's downfall begins because truth is examined carefully, not because people simply react to suspicion. The broader lesson is that appearances can protect lies for a long time, but consistent patterns eventually reveal character. Beauty, manners, and status should never replace integrity, accountability, and proof.